Justice after decades, in 2024, long-buried mysteries were finally brought to light as relentless investigations and cutting-edge forensic advancements delivered long-overdue justice. Families who had spent decades searching for answers finally received the closure they had been waiting for. The first case is the tragic killing of 53-year-old Wayne Pratt, a gas station owner in rural Winnebago County, Wisconsin. On June 12, 1963, Wayne's body was discovered in the back room of his station, having suffered multiple stab wounds. Investigators noted that a blanket had been draped over him, suggesting an attempt to conceal the crime. Despite an extensive inquiry, no strong leads emerged, and the case eventually went cold. For years, speculation swirled. Some believed the motive was robbery, while others suspected personal vendettas. However, no conclusive evidence ever surfaced. Then in 2011, authorities decided to revisit the case, turning to modern forensic technology in hopes of finding new leads. The breakthrough came when forensic analysts re-examined a key piece of evidence: the blanket found near Wayne's body. Traces of DNA were extracted, but the complexity of the sample prevented investigators from identifying a match. Years later, in 2018, law enforcement utilized TrueAllele, an advanced DNA analysis tool, which finally provided a conclusive result. By 2024, authorities identified a match: William A. Doc Stater, a man who had been questioned during the initial investigation in 1963, but was never charged due to a lack of evidence. However, just as the case neared resolution, a heartbreaking twist emerged. Doc Stater had passed away in 2022, 2 years before authorities could take him into custody. While Wayne's family finally had the truth, they were left with mixed emotions: relief that justice had been served, but frustration that the perpetrator would never face legal consequences. The second case follows the tragic attack on 36-year-old Stuart Coldicott, a man whose life was irreversibly changed after a brutal assault in 2014. For nearly a decade, his family waited for answers, all while Stuart endured the devastating consequences of his injuries. In 2024, the truth finally emerged, but it came with its own set of complications. On February 11, 2014, Stuart was violently attacked and left in critical condition. The severe head trauma he suffered left him paraplegic, requiring lifelong care. His once active life was stripped away, and the assault shocked the entire community. Despite several investigations, no strong leads emerged, and the case went cold. For years, authorities struggled to determine whether the attack was random or personal. Then in March 2024, Stuart passed away, marking a pivotal moment in the case. A post-mortem examination confirmed that his death was a direct result of the injuries he sustained a decade earlier. What had once been classified as an assault case was now officially a homicide. This revelation reignited the investigation, leading to a major breakthrough in November 2024. Authorities arrested a 61-year-old man who had been a person of interest since the initial investigation. For Stuart's family, this was the long-awaited step toward justice. However, the case took another unexpected turn. The suspect was released on bail with no trial date set. This decision sparked frustration and uncertainty, leaving Stuart's family grappling with lingering questions. Why had it taken so long to make an arrest? And why was the suspect allowed to walk free after all these years? The third case is one that haunted a family and a community for nearly 4 decades: the tragic murder of 14-year-old Wendy Jerome from Rochester, New York. On Thanksgiving night in 1984, Wendy left home to visit a friend just a few blocks away, but never made it. The next day, her body was discovered near school number 33 on Webster Avenue. She had been brutally assaulted and killed. Despite an exhaustive investigation, the case went cold due to a lack of leads. For years, Wendy's family lived with unanswered questions, clinging to hope that justice would someday be served. That hope was reignited in 2020 when investigators turned to familial DNA analysis, a cutting-edge forensic method that compares crime scene DNA with genealogical databases to identify potential relatives of a suspect. This breakthrough led authorities to Timothy Williams, a man who had lived near Wendy at the time of her murder but had never been a primary suspect. In October 2020, Williams was arrested in Florida and extradited to New York to face charges. In early 2024, his trial began, and the evidence was overwhelming. DNA collected from the crime scene was a direct match. Despite his initial denials, the case against him was undeniable. However, an unexpected setback occurred when the first trial ended in a mistrial due to juror misconduct. This delay left Wendy's family anxious, but justice was finally served in March 2024. Timothy Williams was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Perhaps the most chilling revelation was that Williams had been part of the very community that mourned Wendy's loss, a reminder that sometimes the answers are closer than we realize. The fourth case is one that left a family and a community in mourning for 28 long years. The brutal murder of Danny Hutchins, a 15-year-old girl from Belgrade, Montana. On September 21st, 1996, Danny went to visit the Cameron Bridge fishing access just a few miles from her home, but she never came back. Her family, desperate for answers, watched as the case grew cold, and the years passed without a suspect in sight. But in 2024, a breakthrough came that nobody expected, a twist that would finally bring justice, but also leave lingering questions about the price of closure. Danny Hutchins was a typical 15-year-old girl with her whole life ahead of her. Living in the quiet town of Belgrade, Montana, she was well known and loved by those around her. On the afternoon of September 21st, 1996, Danny left her home to visit the Cameron Bridge fishing access to enjoy a peaceful day. However, she never made it to her destination. As hours passed without Danny returning home, her family grew frantic. The search began immediately, and by the next morning, Danny's body was discovered near the river, submerged in shallow water. The investigation showed signs of a brutal attack. Danny had been sexually assaulted and suffocated. But even with this shocking evidence, the case quickly grew cold. Law enforcement worked tirelessly, but there were no witnesses and no immediate leads. Theories began to fade, and with every passing year, the chances of solving the crime seemed to slip further away. But Danny's family never gave up hope. Justice, they believed, would one day come. By 2019, as advancements in forensic science and DNA technology took hold, the case was reopened. Authorities began to explore new forensic techniques, including running the DNA through the FBI's CODIS database, hoping for a match. But despite these new efforts, no direct match emerged, and the case remained in the dark. Then, in 2020, a game-changing technique called familial DNA testing provided the breakthrough investigators needed. Familial DNA testing allows investigators to find connections to distant relatives if a direct DNA match cannot be made. It had been successfully used to crack cold cases in the past, and now it was Danny's case's turn. The DNA from the crime scene was compared to national genealogical databases, and after months of analysis, the breakthrough finally came. Authorities identified Paul Nathaniel Hutchinson, a 55-year-old man from Dillon, Montana, as a prime suspect. Hutchinson had been living in Belgrade at the time of Danny's murder. He had also been a student at Montana State University, just a short distance from the crime scene. On July 23, 2024, authorities interviewed Hutchinson in Dillon, and his behavior immediately raised suspicion. Investigators noted that he was nervous, and his erratic responses further deepened their suspicion. But just as the case seemed to be moving toward a resolution, a shocking twist occurred. Less than 12 hours after the interview, Paul Hutchinson was found dead. Authorities confirmed he had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The suspect, who might have finally brought the case to closure, was gone. However, the investigation did not stop there. Subsequent DNA testing confirmed that the evidence collected from Danny's body matched Hutchinson's DNA. Hutchinson was now confirmed as the killer, but his death by suicide meant that the family would never see him face trial. The fifth case is one that haunted a family for nearly 20 years. The brutal disappearance of Autumn Lane McClure, a 16-year-old girl from Ormond Beach, Florida. In 2004, Autumn vanished without a trace. But what no one expected was the shocking twist that would finally uncover the dark secrets behind her disappearance. In 2024, after decades of waiting, the mystery was solved, but the resolution left a bitter taste. In 2004, Autumn Lane McClure was a 16-year-old girl living in Ormond Beach, Florida, a bright, loving teen. She had big dreams and a bright future ahead of her. But on May 10, 2004, her life would be tragically cut short. Autumn was last seen by her boyfriend when he dropped her off at Volusia Mall in Daytona Beach. That was the last time anyone saw her. As hours passed and no word came from Autumn, her family grew frantic. They contacted the authorities and an immediate search was launched. But despite their efforts, Autumn was never found. At first, the authorities suspected that she may have run away, as there were no signs of foul play. However, this assumption would soon prove to be tragically wrong, and the real mystery would unravel much darker secrets. When Autumn disappeared, investigators followed every lead they could, interviewing friends, family, and potential witnesses. DNA samples were collected, but there was no clear evidence linking any suspects. As time passed, the case began to grow cold, and the assumption that she had run away gained traction. But the deceptive letters and phone calls claiming to be from Autumn started pouring in. These communications suggested she was alive and well and would come back when she turned 18. At first, authorities were puzzled, but they eventually realized that these letters weren't from Autumn. They were fake. The perpetrator was deliberately leading investigators astray. By 2006, the case had become one of many unsolved mysteries. The family was left in limbo, desperately hoping for news, but the case continued to stall, and with it, their hopes began to fade. Fast forward to 2021, when Chris Miller, an associate of a man named Brian Donnelly, came forward with information that would change everything. Chris revealed that Brian Donnelly had confessed to murdering a teenager and burying her in Volusia County. The investigation then took a crucial step forward with ground-penetrating radar, which was used to scan a trailer site in Ormond Beach, where Donnelly and Freeman had lived. The radar revealed an anomaly beneath the ground, indicating the possibility of buried remains. After months of legal proceedings and preparation, investigators began to excavate the site in early 2024. On April 2024, the excavation led to the discovery of human remains in the area. These remains were sent for DNA analysis, which confirmed that they belonged to Autumn Lane McClure. This 2024 excavation was a turning point in the case, bringing finality to a decades-old mystery. The community, alongside Autumn's family, was struck with a mix of emotions: relief for the truth to come out, but profound sorrow for the loss of a young life. What once was a missing person case had now become a murder investigation, confirming the worst fears of her family. Just when it seemed like the case was finally coming to a close, another shocking twist unfolded. Brian Donnelly, the man who had confessed to killing Autumn, had died due to complications from a medical procedure. This meant that Donnelly would never stand trial for his horrific crime. The twist left the victim's family in shock and dismay. The sixth case is one that devastated a family for nearly 28 years. The brutal murder of Valerie Ames, a 31-year-old mother from Jacksonville, Florida. In 1996, Valerie was tragically found dead in her apartment, stabbed and beaten beyond recognition. The case went cold, leaving her family in agony. For decades, there were no answers, until 2024, when a groundbreaking breakthrough brought the truth to light and finally gave her family the justice they desperately sought. It was August 10, 1996, when Valerie Ames was found dead in her apartment at the Courtyard Apartments on King Street in Jacksonville, Florida. She had been brutally stabbed and beaten to death, her body left in a state that suggested a violent, personal attack. Valerie was a mother to two young daughters. Her sudden and violent death sent shockwaves through her family and the local community. At the time, detectives quickly launched an investigation, interviewing family members, friends, and neighbors. But early on, there was no clear suspect or motive. Investigators weren't sure if the crime was random or if it had been committed by someone close to Valerie. However, no leads panned out. And just like that, Valerie's case went cold. For years, there was only silence. No one was arrested, no suspects were charged, and the case was pushed into the backlog of cold cases. Valerie's two young daughters, who had been left without their mother, grew up without knowing the truth behind her death. And as the years went on, the investigation slipped further into the shadows. Then in 2019, a new hope began to emerge: advancements in forensic technology. In 2019, after years of no progress, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office decided to re-examine the cold case. By this point, forensic science had advanced, and investigators knew that new methods could potentially unearth the answers they had been searching for. In 2024, the breakthrough came. Authorities were able to match the DNA found at the crime scene to Jerry Phillips, a man who had lived in Jacksonville at the time of Valerie's murder. What made this discovery even more surprising was that Phillips had been interviewed back in 1996 but was never considered a serious suspect. For 28 years, the real identity of the killer had remained elusive, and now the truth was finally coming to light. So in April 2024, Jerry Phillips, a 69-year-old man from North Carolina, was arrested in connection with the 1996 murder of Valerie Ames. The arrest was based on new DNA evidence, and investigators were now able to confirm that Phillips was the person responsible for Valerie's brutal death. The seventh case is about RHC brutal murders of Harold and Thelma Swain, a devoted couple from Camden County, Georgia, haunted the community for 28 years. What began as a cold case turned into a dramatic legal saga with wrongful conviction, a DNA breakthrough, and the death of the killer before trial, leaving their family to confront a bitter truth. On March 11, 1985, Harold Swain, a 66-year-old deacon, and his wife Thelma, a 63-year-old homemaker, were tragically murdered during a Bible study session at Rising Daughter Baptist Church in Camden County, Georgia. This wasn't just another murder, it was an attack on a peaceful sanctuary. 8 parishioners were present, and the brutal killings shocked the tight-knit community. Harold and Thelma's bodies were found stabbed and beaten, and it was clear that the murders weren't just random, they were violent and personal. Local law enforcement quickly sprang into action, questioning witnesses, friends, and neighbors. Yet despite their best efforts, there were no clear suspects. Fast forward to 2003, and the case took an unexpected turn. Authorities arrested Dennis Perry, a local man, after an unreliable witness placed him at the scene. Perry was wrongfully convicted of the crime, despite no physical evidence linking him to the murders. He was sentenced to life in prison. Why was he arrested? It came down to the testimony of a key witness, but it was later proven that the testimony had been manipulated and unreliable. Still, Perry served over 20 years behind bars, fighting to prove his innocence. His case became a symbol of the flaws within the justice system and the dangers of circumstantial evidence. However, in 2019, after Perry's exoneration in 2021, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, took a new approach. With new forensic technologies at their disposal, they re-examined the evidence. It was now time to revisit a case that had been stagnant for decades. However, in 2024, the DNA found at the crime scene was matched to Eric Christensen's spare, a 61-year-old man who had lived in Waynesville, Georgia, at the time of the murders. What made this discovery so shocking was that Spare had been interviewed back in 1985, but for some reason, he was not considered a serious suspect at the time. The case had completely overlooked him, and he had lived freely for decades, completely unquestioned. The DNA match finally solved the puzzle, and Spar was arrested. But how could someone who had been so close to the crime remain hidden for so long? The arrest was a shocking revelation for both the community and the surviving family members of Harold and Thelma Swain. As the investigation continued, a tragic twist emerged. Eric Sparey, the man who had evaded justice for nearly 40 years, died in 2024 before he could face trial. And that's a wrap. Which of these cases intrigued you the most? Like the video, subscribe, stay safe, and thanks for watching.